Have you ever wondered what makes some leaders great while others fade into history? Throughout human history, there have been countless rulers, kings, and authorities who have risen to power. Some ruled with terror, others with wisdom, but all eventually lost their thrones to the passage of time. All except one. The year was approximately 1010 BCE. The United Kingdom of Israel was experiencing an unprecedented period of peace and prosperity under King David's reign. As the Ark of the Covenant found its final resting place in Jerusalem, the Israelites began to compose songs celebrating the divine kingship that transcended all earthly monarchies. Among these sacred compositions was Psalm 99, a powerful declaration of God's supreme rulership over all creation. What sets this particular psalm apart from others? The answer lies in its unique threefold proclamation of God's holiness, the only psalm in the entire collection to emphasize this divine attribute so emphatically. Picture yourself in ancient Jerusalem. The limestone walls of the city gleam in the morning sun. The sounds of merchants, animals, and children fill the narrow streets. But as you approach the Temple Mount, a hush falls over the crowd. The Levitical choir has taken their positions and the chief musician raises his hand. The psalm begins. The Lord reigns, let the nations tremble, he sits enthroned between the cherubim, let the earth shake. The words echo across the courtyard, causing the very air to vibrate with their truth. This is no ordinary king being celebrated. This is YHWH, the God who delivered Israel from Egyptian bondage, who parted the Red Sea, who provided manna in the wilderness, and who established his covenant with his chosen people. Scholars date the composition of Psalm 99 to the early monarchical period of Israel, likely during David's reign around 1010 to 970 BCE. The psalm belongs to a collection known as the Enthronement Psalms, Psalms 93 to 99, which celebrate God's kingship over all creation. These psalms were likely used in temple worship, particularly during festivals that commemorated God's covenant with Israel. The structure of Psalm 99 is particularly fascinating. It consists of three distinct sections, each culminating in the declaration, "Holy is He," or "He is holy." This threefold emphasis on God's holiness is unique in the Psalter and emphasizes the central theme of the entire composition. The first section, verses 1 to 3, focuses on God's universal kingship. The second section, verses 4 to 5, highlights his justice and righteousness. The final section, verses 6 to 9, connects God's holiness to his relationship with his people through their spiritual leaders. Let's explore each section more deeply to understand the profound message of this ancient hymn. The Lord reigns, let the nations tremble, he sits enthroned between the cherubim, let the earth shake. Great is the Lord in Zion, he is exalted over all the nations. Let them praise your great and awesome name, he is holy. The psalm begins with a bold declaration, the Lord reigns. In Hebrew, this is YHWH Malak, a statement not just of God's position but of his active rule. This isn't describing a figurehead or ceremonial monarch but a sovereign actively governing the universe. The reference to God being enthroned between the cherubim directly connects to the Ark of the Covenant, where God's presence was said to dwell between two golden cherubim figures atop the mercy seat. This imagery would have been immediately recognizable to the Israelites as representing God's throne room on earth, his royal seat within the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle and later the temple. The psalm declares that the proper response to this divine kingship is trembling, not merely from fear, but from awe and reverence. Even the earth itself is called to shake in recognition of its Creator's authority. The mention of Zion, the hill in Jerusalem where the temple stood, emphasizes that while God rules over all nations, he has chosen a special dwelling place among his covenant people. This geographical specificity doesn't limit God's reign, but rather establishes the epicenter from which his rule radiates outward to encompass all creation. The section concludes with the first declaration of God's holiness. Holy in Hebrew is kadosh, meaning set apart, transcendent, and morally perfect. This isn't merely one attribute among many, but the very essence of God's being. The king is mighty, he loves justice, you have established equity, in Jacob you have done what is just and right. Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his footstool, he is holy. The second section shifts focus to the quality of God's reign. Unlike human monarchs who often abuse their power, this king loves justice. The Hebrew word for justice here, mishpat, encompasses both legal decisions and the broader concept of social equity. The reference to establishing equity emphasizes God's role in creating and maintaining moral order in the universe. This isn't arbitrary rule but governance based on perfect standards of righteousness. In Jacob you have done what is just and right connects God's universal justice to his particular relationship with Israel, also called Jacob. The psalm suggests that Israel serves as a case study of God's just rule, a microcosm where his perfect governance is demonstrated before all nations. The call to worship at his footstool again references the temple, specifically the Ark of the Covenant, which was sometimes described as God's footstool. This physical location provided a tangible point of connection between heaven and earth where humans could approach the divine throne in worship. Once again, the section concludes with the declaration of God's holiness, reinforcing this as the central characteristic that defines his reign. Moses and Aaron were among his priests. Samuel was among those who called on his name. They called on the Lord, and he answered them. He spoke to them from the pillar of cloud. They kept his statutes and the decrees he gave them. Lord our God, you answered them. You were to Israel a forgiving God, though you punished their misdeeds. Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his holy mountain, for the Lord our God is holy. The final section grounds God's holiness in history by naming three pivotal leaders who mediated between God and Israel. Moses, the lawgiver who led Israel out of Egypt, Aaron, the first high priest, and Samuel, the prophet who anointed Israel's first kings. Each served as both representatives of God to the people and representatives of the people before God. This section emphasizes divine human communication. They called on the Lord, and he answered them. Unlike the silent idols of surrounding nations, Israel's God was personally engaged with his people, responsive to their prayers, and active in their history. The pillar of cloud reference recalls the Exodus narrative when God's visible presence guided Israel through the wilderness, Exodus 13 verses 21 to 22. This wasn't distant deity, but a God who manifested his presence tangibly to lead his people. The psalm acknowledges both God's forgiveness and his discipline. You were to Israel a forgiving God, though you punished their misdeeds. This balanced perspective shows that holiness includes both mercy and justice, forgiveness and accountability. The third and final declaration of holiness comes with the command to worship at God's holy mountain, again referring to Mount Zion in Jerusalem. The threefold repetition of God's holiness mirrors the trisagion holy, holy, holy found in Isaiah's vision, Isaiah 6 verse 3, and in the heavenly worship described in Revelation 4 verse 8. But what does this ancient psalm mean for us today, over 3 millennia later? The timeless truth of Psalm 99 speaks directly to our contemporary world, where we often struggle with questions of ultimate authority, justice, and moral standards. First, the psalm challenges our modern autonomy. In a world that celebrates self-determination and rejects external authorities, Psalm 99 boldly proclaims that there is a sovereign God who reigns over all creation, including us. This isn't oppressive but liberating, as it establishes an objective foundation for justice, ethics, and human dignity. Second, it offers hope for justice. In societies plagued by corruption, discrimination, and abuse of power, the psalm points to a divine king who loves justice and establishes equity. This provides both a standard by which to evaluate earthly governments and hope that ultimate justice will prevail beyond human systems. Third, it transforms our concept of worship. The repeated call to exalt the Lord and worship at his footstool/holy mountain reminds us that worship isn't primarily about our preferences or experiences but about responding appropriately to God's holiness. True worship combines reverence with joy, awe with intimacy. Fourth, it personalizes divine holiness. By connecting God's transcendent holiness with his answers to human prayers, the psalm prevents us from viewing holiness as cold or distant. Rather, God's set-apartness includes his compassionate engagement with human needs and his forgiveness of human failings. Throughout history, Psalm 99 has influenced worship practices across diverse traditions. In Jewish liturgy, it forms part of the Kabbalat Shabbat service welcoming the Sabbath. In Eastern Orthodox churches, its emphasis on God's holiness informs the Trisagion hymns sung during Divine Liturgy. Protestant reformers like John Calvin wrote extensively on the psalm, emphasizing its portrayal of God's sovereignty. The musical settings of Psalm 99 are equally diverse. From Gregorian chant to African drumming, from Bach's classical compositions to contemporary gospel arrangements, this psalm continues to inspire artists to express the awe-inspiring holiness of God through creative media. When we truly grasp the message of Psalm 99, it transforms our daily lives in profound ways. Consider leadership. Whether in government, business, education, or family, those who lead are called to reflect God's just and righteous rule. This means using power to serve others rather than exploit them, creating systems that promote equity rather than privilege, and remaining accountable rather than demanding immunity from criticism. Consider ethics. In a world of shifting moral standards, Psalm 99 points to God's holiness as the unchanging foundation for distinguishing right from wrong. This doesn't mean simplistic rule-following, but rather aligning our character with the God who loves justice. Consider prayer. The psalm reminds us that we serve a God who answers, not always how or when we expect, but with both mercy and justice. This encourages boldness in approaching God with our needs while submitting to His wisdom in how He chooses to respond. Consider suffering. When we experience injustice or oppression, Psalm 99 assures us that the final verdict hasn't been given. The God who reigns will ultimately establish perfect justice, vindicating the righteous and correcting all wrongs. The message of Psalm 99 is particularly relevant in our troubled world. When we witness genocide in war-torn regions, when political leaders abuse their power for personal gain, when economic systems favor the wealthy at the expense of the vulnerable, these violations of justice cry out for resolution. On April 7, 1994, one of history's most rapid genocides began in Rwanda, resulting in approximately 800,000 deaths in just 100 days. In such moments of overwhelming evil, Psalm 99 doesn't offer simple answers but provides a framework for lament, protest, and hope. It assures us that such atrocities violate the character of the God who loves justice and will not be the final word in human history. Similarly, when we consider current environmental crises, Psalm 99's declaration that the earth shakes before its creator reminds us of our responsibility to care for the planet as stewards rather than exploiters. The God who reigns over all creation calls us to reflect His just rule in our treatment of the natural world. The historical context of Psalm 99 provides additional depth to its message. Written during Israel's monarchical period, possibly around 1000 BCE, it emerged from a society transitioning from tribal confederation to centralized kingdom. Archaeological discoveries from this period, such as the Tel Dan stele, discovered in 1993 and dating to approximately 840 BCE, confirm the historical existence of the Davidic dynasty mentioned in biblical texts. During this period, Israel was surrounded by nations with powerful god-kings who claimed divine status. In Egypt, pharaohs were worshipped as incarnations of Horus or Ra. In Mesopotamia, kings were considered divine representatives if not divine beings themselves. Against this backdrop, Psalm 99's insistence that only YHWH truly reigns was revolutionary. It relativized human authority while providing the theological foundation for holding kings accountable to divine standards of justice. This historical perspective helps us understand why the psalm emphasizes both God's universal reign over all nations and His particular covenant with Israel. It wasn't cultural chauvinism, but rather the belief that God had chosen Israel to demonstrate His just rule as a witness to all peoples. As a literary composition, Psalm 99 employs several poetic devices to convey its message. The most obvious is the threefold repetition of He is holy, creating a powerful rhythmic structure that builds to a climax. This repetition functions as both a refrain and a thematic anchor, ensuring that readers understand holiness as the defining characteristic of God's reign. The psalm also uses a technique called parallelism, where ideas are stated and then restated in slightly different terms for emphasis and elaboration. For example, "The Lord reigns, let the nations tremble" is paralleled by "He sits enthroned between the cherubim, let the earth shake." This pattern helps readers process and internalize the message through multiple expressions of the same core truth. The imagery of Psalm 99 draws on ancient Near Eastern royal symbolism but transforms it to communicate Israel's unique understanding of divine kingship. Thrones, footstools, mountains, and clouds were common royal motifs throughout the region, but Psalm 99 connects them specifically to YHWH's covenant relationship with Israel and his moral character rather than merely his power. Theologically, Psalm 99 makes several significant contributions to our understanding of God. First, it balances transcendence and immanence. God is both the exalted king before whom nations tremble and the accessible deity who answers prayers. This tension prevents us from reducing God either to a distant abstraction or to a manipulable force. Second, it integrates justice and forgiveness, noting that God both punishes misdeeds and forgives sinners. This complex moral vision avoids both the extreme of consequence-free permissiveness and merciless retribution. Divine holiness encompasses both perfect moral standards and compassionate restoration. Third, it presents worship as the appropriate human response to divine holiness. This worship includes both reverent awe, "Let the nations tremble," and joyful praise, "Let them praise your great and awesome name." True worship emerges from an accurate perception of who God is rather than from human emotional needs or cultural traditions. Fourth, it emphasizes that God's attributes are demonstrated in history, not just proclaimed in theory. By naming Moses, Aaron, and Samuel, the psalm grounds theological claims in the concrete events of Israel's national experience, showing that God's character is revealed through his actions over time. As we conclude our exploration of Psalm 99, let's consider how this ancient text might reshape our understanding of worship today. In many contemporary settings, worship has become increasingly focused on individual expression and emotional experience. While these elements have their place, Psalm 99 calls us back to the foundation, responding to God's holiness with both reverence and joy. Imagine a worship gathering where the primary focus isn't the quality of the music, the eloquence of the preacher, or the comfort of the seating, but rather the recognition that the Lord reigns. Such worship would naturally include elements of awe and trembling alongside celebration and thanksgiving. It would acknowledge human moral failures while embracing divine forgiveness. It would connect present experience with God's historic acts of salvation. The Japanese theologian Kosuke Koyama wrote in his 1974 book, No Handle on the Cross, about the danger of domesticating God to fit our preferences. He described the idolatry as creating a God with handles that we can manipulate and control. Psalm 99 presents the opposite, a God before whom we tremble, whose holiness transforms rather than conforms to our expectations. The message of Psalm 99 transcends cultural and historical boundaries. From the bustling streets of Tokyo to the remote villages of the Amazon, from corporate boardrooms to refugee camps, all people ultimately stand before the same holy God who reigns in perfect justice. This universal reign provides common ground for human ethics, dignity, and purpose across diverse contexts. On December 10, 1948, the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, articulating principles of human dignity and equality that echo the biblical understanding of justice established by the Divine King. While not explicitly religious, such efforts to establish universal ethical standards point to the human recognition that justice must have a foundation beyond cultural preference or political power, precisely what Psalm 99 provides. As we stand at the threshold of uncertain times with political tensions, environmental concerns, economic inequalities, and technological disruptions shaping our collective future, Psalm 99 speaks a timeless word of hope and challenge. It reminds us that above all human authorities and beyond all historical contingencies, there reigns a holy God who loves justice and answers those who call on his name. This is not a call to passive resignation but to active participation in God's just reign, to align our lives, institutions, and societies with the character of the King described in this ancient psalm. It's an invitation to join our voices with countless others across time and space who have declared, "Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his holy mountain, for the Lord our God is holy." The question that remains is not whether God reigns. Psalm 99 declares this as established fact, but whether we will acknowledge this reign and live accordingly. In a world of competing authorities and conflicting voices, will we orient our lives around the holy God who established equity and does what is just and right? The answer to that question will determine not only our individual lives but the collective future of our human community. Before you go, I want to personally invite you to be part of our growing community here at Prayer Universe. If this video touched your heart or brought you peace, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a prayer or message that can uplift your spirit. But most importantly, I'd love to hear from you. In the comments below, share just one word or phrase of motivation that this video inspired in you, whether it's hope, gratitude, peace, or something else. Your words matter deeply to us because they help guide the content we create for this channel. Together, let's build a space filled with faith, encouragement, and connection. Thank you for being here, and remember, every prayer counts. See you in the next one.